with the police. I never thought fighting the police or fighting the university was going to end the war. I was glad that the huge march in May was peaceful, but our goal had not been to create a peaceful march. People's Park, therefore, became a Rorschach. We all had different experiences. I went to every rally, I went to every march, I got gassed multiple times, and I wrote about what was happening, including the stunning political posters that popped up everywhere, all over the campus and the city. But in my view, too many people took their eyes off the most important goal, which was to end the American war in Vietnam.
Dan Siegel was the incoming student body president of Cal, and it was his call to action on May 15th that prompted thousands to stream out of Sproul Plaza on that fateful day. I was one of them. He was admitted to the bar after protracted litigation. He went on to practice law, often representing workers, and served 8 years on the board of directors of the Oakland Unified School District and running for mayor. Dan Siegel.
I'd like to start by thanking everyone for coming out tonight. I didn't see the sign, but I guess you saw the one that said no one under 60 allowed. But it's good we're all here. I want to really thank Tom and Steve for putting the book together. I think it's a great book. I mean, it's really a piece of history that relies on multimedia, people's own statements. But I want to say, and maybe this is me, typically me, I disagree with the context, okay? I do not believe People's Park was the beginning or the end of anything, okay? I think that People's Park was an important battle in a fight that had been going on already for many years of the campus community, students and people who live in Berkeley, to have some control over their own destiny and their own space. That's what FSM was about. Activists came back from the South. They wanted to do civil rights organizing on campus. The university said they couldn't. In my first year at Cal, we had Stop the Draft Week, and people were suspended because they came back to the campus and wanted to continue the fight. Same thing with the Vietnam moratorium. The next year, we had the Cleaver class. We had the Third World Strike, which was the most momentous, violent, racist repression against students and people in the community who wanted the college to be relevant to their own concerns and not just reflect white privilege. We had the Cleaver class. We had 1970 when we won the battle over university facilities because we took 20,000 students out on strike over the invasion of Cambodia, the murders at Jackson State and Kent State, and the university had to back down. My point is simply that this is an issue in a long continuum, and in fact, it continues today. I spent the day in federal court battling the city of Berkeley over its policies towards homeless. And that's why I was kind of, amazed that the current Berkeley mayor, who makes Wally Johnson of the People's Park days look like a liberal, overseen an administration which treats homeless people like trash, criminalizes their behavior, attempts to wipe them off the street, and
fucking sexually assaults them, fucking harasses
that's right, exactly, and which over this past weekend smashed a free box that people had put up at People's Park to share food, clothing, medical supplies with poor and homeless people. So I'd like to hear Aragon get up here and defend the city's behavior because it's no better than what we faced in 1969. Now, I spoke fast, so I have time to tell my own little People's Park story because, People's Park was a 15 minutes of fame for me. It cost me years fighting for my admission to the bar. I went on trial. It was all accidental. You know, I had just been elected student body president. I walked out onto the campus of Sproul Plaza. I knew the rally would end at 1 o'clock because that's what had been the rule since the FSM. And John David Bachrach, who was an ASUC senator, said, "Hey, Dan, you should say something. You were just elected." So I got up and I made my speech, and it was fairly incendiary, and I don't apologize for that. But I fully expected that when I was done at 12:37, other people would get up and say, "This is what we planned, and this is what's going to happen today." And I would sit down and join the crowd. But the cops, the Berkeley cops, turned off the sound equipment when I finished at 12:37, 23 minutes early, and everybody left, not streaming down Telegraph Avenue. Those of you who were there, people were carrying balloons, people were pushing their kids in strollers. It wasn't until they got to the cops that things became hairy. But there was something else that we learned about what the police were doing, because I went on trial, and during my trial, of course, they played the tape of my speech. And when it was over, you could hear these people talking. Michael Lerner was standing there. Tom Hayden was standing there. They're, "Dan, what the hell did you do? You weren't supposed to end the rally." And I said, "I didn't end the rally. The cops ended the rally." But that conversation was picked up on the tape that the police made, because within the big microphone that carried my voice out over the plaza was a little tiny microphone that was connected by a wire to a tape recorder in the basement of Sproul Hall. So they not only were able to record our speeches, but they recorded all the conversation that took place around the speaker stand. So, you know, that's my admission. I guess I've used up my time, but thank you all for being here again.
Judy Gumbo is a co-founder of People's Park, along with her late partner, Stu Albert, and was one of the original Yippies. She went on to write for the Berkeley Barb and the Berkeley Tribe, and she is currently completing a long-awaited memoir.
Thank you, and I'm really delighted and want to repeat what Dan said about thanking Steve and Tom. So I want to talk briefly about what it was like to be a woman in People's Park, but I want to begin by talking about a man, Stu Albert, who I love to death, and he is long gone now, but I bet many of you here knew him. He wrote the call for the park, and it began, "A park will be built this Sunday between Dwight and Haste." And so it happened. People's Park gave us an alternative communitarian vision that allowed women and men to go beyond the tales or reality of rape and sexual harassment that was a legacy of the Summer of Love. People's Park, at least in my experience, was a truly safe place for women, and especially children. And you can see the children in Tom's book. To play, to work, to actualize our vision, and be as free as we wanted. We had a powerful sense of controlling our space. It was a liberated zone for everybody. Now, the word liberation, as you may recall, was floating around a lot in those days. There was black liberation, there were the Panthers, there were liberation of all people of color. There was the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam. There was the Third World Liberation Front. There was even, you may remember, Jefferson Fuck Poland and sexual liberation. But there was not, at that moment, liberation for women. So just as we started building the park, Ann Wiles, who is sitting over there, and I also started a women's group. We were not the first, but we were radical feminists who called ourselves women's liberationists. We met at 2917 Ashby Avenue. Diane Lipton was there, Linda Morse, Jane Shearer came and went, Alta the poet, and Sherry Whitehead. But Alta was really interesting because she alerted us to the demeaning aspects of countercultural verbiage like chick, baby chicken, bitch, dog, old lady. Now, I may be an old lady now, but I certainly did not consider myself an old lady 50 years ago. Diane, I remember Diane saying she didn't want to be treated like a domestic servant. Valerie Solanas was our hero, which raised the question for us, who is woman's enemy? Most women said society, which today we call the patriarchy. Only a few said men. What made our group different is that we were an action faction. So to do that, we decided to call a women's march, to begin at Sproul Plaza and go to the park. We would demand the impossible, equality and liberation for women. Anne would speak for our group on Sproul Steps. We debated whether or not to bring children to our march. The date we chose was May 15th. On May 15th, we woke to find the park fenced in. Bringing children was out, as was our entire march. The scrum of events had overwhelmed what was now for me a primary agenda, that of my own freedom. Like so many contributions women make, our Berkeley Women's March became forgotten history, but I am here to reclaim that history now. So in the first days after the park and after the occupation, Barb editor Max Scheer published an article I wrote on women's liberation. I just want to read the very end of it for you, because it's still cool. The headline's coming. We don't hate men.